Are you struggling with world history? Are you longing for 8 plus in the final history exam? Are you getting tired of watching Jerome watching a football match during the class time? This is definitely a chance for you guys to fully understand what Star Wars, no I mean Space Race, and get 8 plus on final. So let's get into this. After World War II, in the mid-20th century, a new conflict began. Known as the Cold War, this was a battle between the world's two greatest powers, the democratic capitalist United States and the communist Soviet Union. Beginning in the late 1950s, space would become another dramatic arena for this competition, as each side sought to prove the superiority of its technology, its military firepower, and the extension to its political-economic system. Although the US and the USSR fought as allies during the war, historically they were never friendly. Within months of the war ending, Russian expansion begins with the Soviet leader Stalin consolidating his control over the European countries in his power, making the most democratic country, United States, to worry. US President Truman pledges to help nations threatened by the Soviet Union's attempts to expand. His strategy is to contain and challenge Soviet power by offering financial and military aid to anti-communist forces abroad. This declaration of opposition triggers the Cold War, a conflict that lasted 44 years. However, the Cold War never led to an actual military war. It was closer to a war of nerves between US and USSR. The space race begins as a war of words when the US announces it intends to launch the first artificial satellite into outer space. In response, the USSR said it will also launch a satellite in the near future. The two countries' political amity begins to play out in a battle for spaceflight supremacy, watched by a global audience. The Soviets launched Sputnik 1 into space, capturing the world's attention and striking American confidence hard. By the time in the United States, space was seen as the next frontier, a logical extension of the grand American tradition of exploration, and it was crucial not to lose too much ground to the Soviets. So in 1960, John F. Kennedy runs on a political platform of closing the gap in the space race. Once again, the Soviets get there first by launching astronaut Yuri Gagarin into space. When he completes an orbit of Earth in Vostok 1, he becomes a Soviet hero and a celebrity worldwide. For the US effort to send a man into space, they tested their spacecraft using chimpanzees and dogs. Later that May, President John F. Kennedy made the bold public claim that the US will land a man on the moon before the end of the decade. In February 1962, John Glenn became the first American to orbit Earth with a great help of the Women Mathematician Group in NASA. From 1963 to 1969, the race to the moon accelerates and the tension was in the highest. NASA's budget was increased by 500% and they were putting their best effort to finally send a man to lunar. The Americans launched a sequence of Apollo missions while the Soviets developed their Vostochny and Soyuz crafts. Each side overcomes huge challenges and suffers terrible tragedies as the race to the moon hits full speed. Finally, 1969, 20th July, Apollo 11 landed on the moon. Neil Armstrong takes his first famous steps on the moon, clinching victory for America in a landing witnessed by 723 million people. Once the lunar goal was achieved, the political quest for domination was satisfied, and NASA's plan for further expensive space missions were met with less enthusiasm. The USSR tried and failed 4 attempts to launch a lunar landing craft between 1969 and 1972, eventually canceling them to focus on Earth orbital space stations. With the conclusion of the space race, US government interest in lunar missions reduced after the early 1970s. In 1975, the joint Apollo-Soyuz mission sent 3 US astronauts into space aboard an Apollo spacecraft that docked in orbit with a Soviet-made Soyuz vehicle. When the commanders of two crafts officially greeted each other, their handshake in space served to symbolize the gradual improvement of US-Soviet relations in the late Cold War era.